Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I am your host, Lonnie Jones. My wife Jackie and I moved to the city of Huntsville in 1986 for me to be a youth and family minister. I have been a minister since 1980. I have served in this community as a police chaplain assigned to a SWAT team since 1992, and I've been in private practice as a licensed professional counselor since 1998. I'm also an adventure educator and an avid outdoorsman. I dabble in rock climbing and I goof around with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Our life has been full of many wonderful experiences and some just outright adventures. I used to write about those things in a little church bulletin article. So now instead of asking you to read those things, we're just going to talk about them in our podcast. And as we talk about them, we're going to talk about the facts. The facts lead to concepts, and the concepts lead to application. One caveat about the facts is, for the most part, we're going to tell you the facts just as they happened. But every now and then, we're going to tell you the way other people have told us they remember it happening with a little bit of embellishment. It's all good, clean fun and for educational purposes. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy Keeping Up with Jones. When I was a little boy, I attended the Faulkner University lectureships. Our preacher, Charles Box, took me and my brother down there. I sat in the balcony of the rotunda. I hung my feet over the edge and propped my chin on the middle rail of the guardrail. This year, there will be the 80th annual Faulkner University lectureships, and they'll be addressing different aspects of what the New Testament teaches on grace. There will be 91 speakers from 10 different states, and there are also some special seminars. There'll be a campus ministry workshop, a digital ministry workshop, a homeschooling seminar. They will address some various aspects of sexual ethics. There'll also be a special athletics seminar called Pursuing the Imperishable, the Athlete's Focus in Christ, and this will feature two-time NBA champion Norris Cole. If you'd like more information or you'd like to register to attend this event, that is faulkner.edu/lectureship, faulkner.edu/lectureship. Faulkner University is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. If you are listening to this when it is actually released at 6 a.m. on Tuesday, October the 15th, 2024, as you listen to it, I will be literally hanging out in my tree saddle for the opening day of archery season. I am blessed and fortunate that this will be my 24th season to hunt with a bow. And with very few exceptions, I have not missed opening day. On October the 20th, 2000, at 6:15 in the afternoon, I shot and trailed my very first deer with a bow. It was just a small doe, and other than Gunner's first deer, it is still the most memorable and favorite deer hunt I've ever had. But I have other bow hunting memories. I started bow hunting simply because I wanted to extend my season, because bow season opens a little earlier than rifle season, but I've become a real fan of shooting a bow. I practice in the backyard. I love to shoot a bow. I have shot deer, squirrels, frogs, snakes, one eel, and lots of fish with a bow. Now, in order to harvest a deer with a bow, so many things have to go right. And if one little thing goes wrong, it's not going to happen. Now, that's different than hunting with a rifle. I've taken big game as far out as 380 yards with my rifle, and I've rung 12-inch steel plates at 500, at 725, and recently at 1,000 yards with a rifle. A bow is an entirely different thing. It is close quarters hunting. The extreme end of my comfort range with a bow is about 40 yards. Now, I've only ever shot 2 deer at that distance. Most of the deer I shoot with a bow are inside 30 yards. So you're talking about close quarters encounters with these animals, and you have to be super quiet. It's not just enough to find the place where they're at. but you've got to get into shooting position, and they've got to cooperate and be in the position amongst the leaves and the trees in order to be shot. Now, I've shot 2 deer at 40 yards, but I've also missed quite a few deer at much closer range. Anything can go wrong. You can hit a limb. You can just miss your shot. You can misjudge the distance, and a deer can actually dodge an arrow. The bow that I shoot is a PSE X-Force Super Short, and it shoots 300 feet per second. And I've seen a deer lie down and avoid the arrow under 30 yards. And just shooting one, just hitting one with an arrow doesn't mean you're going to get to bring him home. I hate to admit that I've shot several deer that have eluded my ability to find them, including one really big buck on Kill Mountain, and then a 140-inch buck in Indiana. I hit both of them. The Indiana buck was a clean pass-through shot. He left blood drops the size of quarters for about 50 yards, and then he just disappeared. I used to tell people that I think Bigfoot carried him off. Actually, what I think happened is he tried to cross the river, and he just never emerged. One of my favorite bow hunting memories is hunting in Joe Wheeler Wildlife Refuge. This is the little Beaver Dam Swamp right there on the side of I-565. And I walked in on the last day of the season. I chose to leave rifle hunting and end the season by hunting with a bow. I sat in my stand, and just before dark, a big 8-point walked in past me, but he was well out of my range at the time. In just a minute, another buck, similar size, came through as well. And it wasn't long that after they disappeared into the brush that I heard the unmistakable sound of 2 bucks fighting. The sound of their antlers crashing each other and the rattling, and when they would hit each other, it would resound like somebody shooting a gun, and then they would maneuver their heads left and right, and the ends of their antlers would rattle against each other. And they were so close that in some cases, when their antlers would ram into each other, the bone on bone would interlock, and as they pulled apart, you could hear it squeal. I probably sat in that tree 30 minutes after dark under a full moon listening to the sounds of these 2 bucks sparring. It was a very special ending to a very cool season. I learned to hunt at Wheeler because my friend Harold Purtle showed me this spot. He showed me how to walk in, and there was a little piece of high ground that ran through this little swamp, and the deer traveled it like a highway. And so one afternoon, I slipped into this area, and I was going to go to the spot that Harold had shown me. And as I was walking in, I discovered a series of trees that had been rubbed by a deer. Now, deer do several different things when they're marking their territory and trying to leave messages for the females. One of the things that they'll do is they'll make a scrape. And that's where they will paw the ground out, and they'll move all the leaves out of it, and it'll just be bare dirt. There'll be a branch above it that they like to lick or rub with their foreheads and leave scent. And then they will leave chemical messages in this cleared out path. And then a doe will come along, and if she's in estrus, she may leave a chemical message in the dirt. And then the buck will come downwind and check this scrape. And if he sees that there's a receptive doe in the area, he may come to that scrape. The other thing deer do is they mark trees by rubbing them with their antlers. Now, sometimes they rub the trees with their antlers while their antlers are still growing and they have velvet on them, and they're going to remove the velvet. But after the velvet has been removed, then they rub these trees to mark their territory, sometimes as signpost. Sometimes they mark them and they have a gland between their antlers that leaves a smell on them. And typically they rub these trees to practice for sparring with other deer. And you can sometimes judge, it's not 100%, but the bigger diameter of the tree is probably going to indicate the bigger and stronger the buck. And the height of that rub off the ground is also going to indicate how tall that buck is when he bends his head down and how high up he goes while he's rubbing the tree. This one area that I walked into was covered with dozens of rubs. And there were big trees and there were little trees. There were good rubs. There were small rubs. And in the very center of all this rubbing activity was this one lone straight tree. And I changed my initial plan. I abandoned going to this spot that Harold had shown me all those weeks ago, and I decided I was going to hunt right here among those rubs. And whatever was coming in with such frequency to make dozens of rubs, I was going to be there when he came back in. Now, I like to hunt at about 25 feet off the ground. So I put my old man vision climber around the tree, and I climbed up to about 25 feet. I settled in and waited. Around 4:30, I heard the leaves, the unmistakable sound of something heavy-footed walking. Something was walking toward me, and it was coming in from behind me. I grabbed my bow and I stood up. I got my release attached to my string, because as soon as whatever it was walked into my shooting path, I was going to shoot it. To my surprise, as I looked behind me around the tree, it was not a deer, but a dude. And he had a backpack. He laid the backpack down, and he withdrew from the backpack a deer antler in a spray bottle. And then he began walking around, spraying the antler and then rubbing it against the trees. I watched him in amazed silence. This guy was creating false rubs. He was leaving these fake chemical trails and marking these trees, trying to incite the dominant bucks or just any other buck in the area to come in and see who was encroaching on their territory. He was luring the deer in by pretending to be a deer himself. I was very still and very quiet. I thought, I'll just wait for him to leave, and then he won't know that he's fooled me, and he won't know that I was hunting his area, although this is public land. It doesn't belong to anybody, so anybody can hunt anywhere. But to my shock and amazement, after he'd finished with the rubs, he went back to his backpack and he got out a lock-on stand. He walked in and began to attach this stand to the tree I was sitting in. Now, he's going to put this thing up at some height, but if he locks this stand in and then leaves, I'm going to be trapped. I'm not going to be able to get out of the woods. Now, he never did look up, and it slowly dawned on me that if I didn't say something, he might leave this stand locked to the tree, and I would have no way to climb down past it or around it. I would either have to jump out of the tree or leave my stand in the tree overnight. So I made a command decision. I decided to speak up. I cleared my throat and said, well, there's no good way to do this, I started to say, but that's when he started. He spoke the name of the Messiah. He invoked the name of the Creator God. He grabbed his heart. He called upon them both. He spoke to Jesus, and again, and he apparently said to Jesus, I know what the deer feel like. He had a great northern accent. He was probably from way up north, and he had been transplanted to the south. He sat on a stump, still clutching his heart. He stood up. He paced, he sat down, all the time holding his heart. Now, at first, I was concerned that he might be mad at me finding his spot. Now, I was just concerned that he might not survive. I'm going to give this dude a heart attack. And he's walking around, and he's fussing, and he's cussing, and I don't know what I'm going to do if he dies. If I have to drag him out, am I going to need to field dress him first? Or do I just leave the body and call the cops? A Daffy Duck death scene could not have been more dramatic. Oh, you got me. I'm dead. You shot me in the heart. This guy was going through all the theatrics of a guy who'd been scared to death, and yet he wasn't going to die. Eventually, he calmed down. He sat down, and he did not die. I finally spoke again. Hey, if you'll move your stand, I'll climb down, and I promise not to come back. He said, I know how the deer feel. Well, how did the deer feel? You see, the deer walking through the forest are somewhat secure. And he felt secure. He felt safe. And he felt in control. And he felt like he was the top of the food chain. He was hunting. But suddenly he felt as if he was the hunted. He was attempting to deceive a deer and gave no thought as to whom or what he might fool and cause them to hunt there, and actually by default end up hunting him. And in all actuality, it worked. I walked in my naivete, I found what I thought was legitimate signs and decided to hunt whatever had made the marks on the trees, and it turned out I was hunting a who and not a what. Now, I kill a coyote every now and then, but I don't typically just hunt predators because predators don't expect to be hunted. I'm not saying that's bad if you hunt predators. That's just a thing I don't do. This gentleman made the assumption that he was the only predator in the woods. This gentleman made the assumption that he was the only hunter out that day. And he had given no thought to what his activity might actually attract. He set this trap, and it was designed to attract a deer, but it ended up being the perfect spot for a hunter to hunt a hunter. He walked into a trap that he'd made himself, and it turned out he'd unwittingly made it for himself. I'm not judging the gentleman. I'm just making an observation. Had he been a deer and I have startled him like that, he'd simply fled the area. This man may be a good hunter, but he's terrible prey because he just froze. Well, he didn't freeze. He stayed in the area, and he produced a lot of dynamic inactivity for all his pacing and speaking and cursing and standing and sitting. He stayed trapped in the trap. It's a good thing I wasn't really hunting him. Now, maybe he had the presence of mind to realize that I was hunting that spot and not actually hunting him, so he really didn't need to run. But his theatrics and all the drama that he put up with, I really think he just lost his ability to process information because he was so shocked and startled that he had indeed become the hunted. As a little boy, before I could drive, before I could date, before mom and dad would let me go to football games by myself, I spent a lot of my Friday nights watching Kolchak the Night Stalker. I watched this little series called Friday Night Frights. I watched a lot of these spooky movies. And I learned a lesson from watching mad scientists and genetic experience and mutant makers. And the lesson I learned is the monster you create will eat you. The way you treat people will eventually be the way you are treated. The traps that you build can and often do trap you. You might never know it. You might never foresee it. You might never expect it, but you can walk right into it and never look up. We may spend a lot of time planning our futures and our fortunes. And we may think that we are hunting fame and fortune and power and notoriety and pleasure and popularity. And I'm not saying that these things are inherently bad in and of themselves, but please be aware that those same pursuits have the potential and power to be used against us. The things we are hunting are being used to hunt us. If you find the white oak acorns, you find the deer. Temptation is not always just a chance or a lure to do bad or to do wrong or to be bad or to be wrong. But sometimes the most fundamental form of temptation is that our pursuits, our wants, can be weaponized against us. True temptation is the weaponization of our desires. We may be creating the perfect setup and not be aware that all the time we are being set up. Using the tool of shortwave radio, World Christian Broadcasting literally covers the world every day with the gospel. They use two large curtain antennas. One is located in Anchor Point, Alaska, and the other in Madagascar. They send out messages that are recorded at their international home in Franklin, Tennessee. They make available 40 hours of broadcast every day. The broadcasts are made in English, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, Korean, English for Africa, and Arabic. They would love for your group to visit them. You can bring your ladies group, your youth group, or your men's group. Just give them a call at 615-371-8707, 615-371-8707, or you can go to 3 W's and a dot, worldchristian.org. Find the Donate Here button and make a financial contribution to support this work that literally covers the world every day with the gospel. World Christian Broadcasting, in cooperation with Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure.